Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. We always love diving deep into Islamic teachings, and today we're going to be exploring a collection of hadiths
Yeah.
from Sahih Bukhari,
Oh, very nice.
specifically Book 76,
Okay.
To Make the Heart Tender,
Okay.
which I think is just such a beautiful and kind of evocative title.
Yeah, it is. It really sets the tone for this whole book, this idea of cultivating a heart that's really receptive and open to
Mm.
both the joys and sorrows of this life and the next.
Yeah, exactly. And we have a really rich selection of hadiths to kind of help guide us
Yeah.
on this journey. And what struck me, even just on like a first glance at these hadiths, was how this book doesn't just talk about the afterlife in some kind of abstract way,
Mm.
but it really weaves it into discussions of our daily lives, our choices, our emotions even.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I think so often we tend to kind of compartmentalize our faith. We relegate it to certain rituals or specific times. But what these hadiths show us is that Islam is really a way of being, not just doing. And it informs every single aspect of our existence, from the mundane to the profound.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. Right off the bat, we encounter several hadiths highlighting the very transient nature of this world.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Hadith 421, it reminds us of two blessings that we often take for granted: health and free time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle, right,
Right.
of just everyday life.
It really is, and that's precisely the point. It's a call to awareness, this hadith. It's not just stating a fact, but prompting us to think about how we're actually utilizing this precious time, this precious health that we have, and how much of it is actually wasted in a sense, by things that don't really benefit us in the long
Right.
term, the endless scrolling,
Man.
the pursuit of fleeting distractions.
We're almost conditioned to
Yeah.
waste these precious gifts in a way. It's like
in terms
society itself pushes us towards instant gratification and just constant
Yeah.
distract.
Absolutely. So how do we combat this? This is where the deeper dive really becomes valuable. Because these hadiths aren't just meant to be read passively, they're an invitation to reflect and then to actually take action. So what steps can you take as a listener to reclaim that time, to
Yeah.
reclaim that energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. For all of us to consider, right? Maybe it's setting aside specific time each day for reflection or
Oh,
just
sure.
connecting from technology for a
They've
living.
been choosing to engage in activities that bring you genuine joy and fulfillment.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah.
Yep. We see this theme of transience woven into the context of hardship as well.
Okay.
So you have Hadith 422 and 423, and these place us right in the middle of the Battle of Al-Khandaq, with the Muslims facing intense pressure and fear.
You're right.
And yet, the Prophet's supplication for the Ansar and the immigrants focuses on the reward of the hereafter.
Yeah. And just to clarify for our listeners, the Ansar were the early Muslims in Medina who welcomed the Prophet and his followers when they migrated from Mecca. And, they were alongside the immigrants, those who had left Mecca with the Prophet. They were facing a life or death situation, literally.
Yeah. But amidst all of this, the emphasis
Yeah.
is on where true life actually lies.
Mm-hmm.
Not just in terms of, physical survival,
Yeah,
but in that eternal realm.
precisely. And it's as if the Prophet is guiding them, and by extension, guiding us to zoom out, to see the bigger picture that this worldly struggle, as intense as it might be, it's temporary in the grand scheme of things.
Right. So powerful. It's such a shift in perspective, a way of almost reframing even the most difficult trials.
And it's not just this vague notion. Hadith 424 puts this concept in very concrete terms. A small space in paradise is worth more than the entire world and everything in it.
Wow. It's almost like trying to compare a grain of sand to an entire beach,
Oh.
It really challenges our understanding
Gospel.
of value.
Absolutely. And that's the invitation, isn't it? It's to reevaluate our priorities.
Yeah.
What are we truly striving for? Where are we placing our ultimate hopes, our aspirations?
It's like holding up a mirror
Here.
to our own hearts, right?
Yeah.
And asking, what really matters to me?
Precisely. Now, to guide us further on this journey of introspection, we have Hadith 425. And this is where the Prophet advises Ibn Umar, one of his closest companions, to live as a traveler.
Okay, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Because it just instantly makes this abstract concept of detachment so relatable.
Right. And it's so rich with meaning. Because if you think about it, a traveler doesn't get bogged down by unnecessary baggage, right? They're focused on the essentials. I know that their stay is temporary. They appreciate the scenery, the experience,
Yeah.
but they don't get attached to any particular place.
And how do we apply this to our own lives? How do we practically, pack for this journey to the hereafter?
Well, the hadith itself actually gives us a really powerful guideline. It says, take from your health for your sickness and from your life for your death.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, because this is more than just avoiding bad deeds.
Right.
This is about actively using our good health, our time, our energy to invest in our hereafter.
Yeah. It's like making deposits into a spiritual bank account,
Yeah.
Every act of kindness, every prayer we offer with sincerity, every effort we make to improve ourselves, these become provisions for the journey ahead.
I've never thought about it that way before.
Mhm.
It's like reframing the way we approach our daily lives. Every moment becomes an opportunity
Yeah.
to build towards something that's actually lasting and meaningful.
Precisely. And that leads us to another really fascinating aspect of this book, which is the exploration of hope and worldly desires. But maybe we should pause here and dive into that in that next segment. So, picking up where we left off, let's explore this whole dynamic between hope and worldly desires, because it's a theme that I think really resonates, deeply with the human experience.
Oh, for sure. It's like this constant balancing act,
Mm.
isn't it?
Mhm.
Because on the one hand, you have this innate drive for progress,
Yeah.
for achieving our goals, for
Yeah.
building a better future. But then on the other hand, we're constantly reminded of the fragility of life, the uncertainty of tomorrow.
Exactly. And that's, I think, where the wisdom of these hadiths really shines through. Take Hadith 426, for instance. The Prophet uses this really vivid imagery of a square representing our lifespan, a line extending beyond it, which symbolizes hope, and then these little lines intersecting, representing calamities.
Yeah, it's such a powerful visual. I can almost picture it like being drawn in the sand.
Yeah.
And it just really drives home that point that no matter how grand our plans are
Yeah.
or how far-reaching our hopes are, unexpected events can just completely,
Yeah.
alter our course.
Exactly. And I think it's a reminder to hold our plans loosely, to acknowledge that we're not in complete control. And it's not meant to instill fear or pessimism, but rather just like a healthy sense of detachment and reliance on Allah's plan.
Right. It's about finding that balance between striving for our goals and surrendering to the divine will, right? It's
Yeah.
about acknowledging our limitations while still making the most of the time and the opportunities that we've been given.
Exactly. And this ties in really nicely with Hadith 427, where the Prophet emphasizes that as we age, our time diminishes, and consequently our excuses become less valid.
Oh, I see. So it's almost like a gentle nudge to kind of reprioritize what truly matters.
Precisely.
It's like realizing you've spent way too much time browsing the souvenir shops and now you're running out of time to actually explore the destination that you traveled all this way to see.
That is such a great analogy. Yeah, it really highlights that urgency, of aligning our actions with our values and how procrastination, especially when it comes to matters of faith and character, it can have long-term consequences.
Right. So it's not about fearing death. It's about living with intention,
Yeah,
making each day count, right? Knowing that our time here is finite and so precious.
absolutely. And this leads us to, I think, an interesting observation about human nature. That's highlighted in Hadiths 429 and 430, it seems that. The desires for wealth and long life don't actually diminish as we age. They often intensify.
That's so true. It's almost like a paradox.
Right.
You think as we get closer to the end of our lives, these worldly desires would kind of fade. But a lot of times it seems like the opposite happens.
It's the nature of desire, I think. It's often rooted in this sense of lack, a fear of missing out, a yearning for security. And so as we age and we see perhaps our physical limitations increasing or we experience loss, these anxieties can actually get amplified.
Right. So it's a reminder that true contentment
Mm-hmm.
doesn't come from just acquiring more,
Yeah.
but it comes from a shift in perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? Recognizing
All right.
the abundance we already have
Mm-hmm.
and really cultivating a sense of gratitude for the blessings in our lives.
Exactly. Cultivating that inner peace that's not dependent on external circumstances.
Right.
But I want to point out, that being said, this book doesn't demonize wealth or the desire for it. There's a nuanced understanding that wealth itself is not inherently good or evil. It's a tool. It's a resource. And so it's how we acquire it and how we use it that matters.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly captured in Hadiths 433 and 434, where the Prophet expresses concern over the potential for wealth to kind of corrupt and distract.
Mm-hmm.
And he's actually drawing parallels with past nations
Mm-hmm.
that were destroyed by their love of the world.
Right. So powerful reminder that even blessings can become trials if they end up leading us away from our purpose.
It's like that saying, money is a good servant, but a bad master.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It can be a means to do so much good, to support our families, to contribute to worthy causes. But if we allow it to become our primary focus, if we're chasing it relentlessly, it can really warp our values and blind us to what truly matters.
It really makes me think about how much emphasis our society places on, material success. It's almost like a constant bombardment of messages equating wealth with happiness.
It's a challenge, for sure, to
Yeah.
kind of navigate this world without getting swept up in all of that. But that's where I think the guidance of these hadiths becomes so valuable, because they're providing that counter-narrative, that different set of values that we can orient ourselves by.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this leads us to Hadith 435, where the duality of wealth is presented so beautifully through the analogy of an animal grazing by a stream.
Oh, I love that.
Right.
Such a simple yet profound image. You know the animal that grazes moderately, it benefits from the pasture?
Yeah.
The one that overindulges, it becomes bloated and sick.
Yeah. It's like a perfect illustration of how wealth, when acquired and used responsibly, can be a source of blessing. But when pursued greedily, it can actually lead to harm, both to ourselves and to others. Makes you think about, what is our own relationship with wealth? Are we using it to kind of fuel our ego and our desires? Or are we using it as a means to serve Allah and benefit those around us?
That is the question. That I think we all need to regularly ask ourselves, because it's so easy to get caught up in that cycle of wanting more, comparing ourselves to others, chasing after that next level of material comfort.
Right.
These hadiths are reminding us that true wealth lies in contentment, in gratitude, and in using our resources wisely.
Absolutely. And this theme of contentment leads us to another fascinating aspect of this book, which is this contrast between worldly status and true piety.
Yes.
Right? This is where the book really challenges societal norms, and it kind of flips the script on what it means to be successful.
Exactly. It's a redefinition of success.
So it's interesting, right? Because we've been talking about this idea of contentment and how it relates to wealth. But the book goes even deeper, right? It really assumptions about status and what it actually means to be successful.
It does, yeah. And this challenge, I think, is rooted in a fundamental principle in Islam, which is that true value lies in piety, in the state of our hearts, not in our outward appearances or our material possessions.
And we see this clearly in Hadith 454, where the Prophet encounters two men. And he's highlighting this contrast between the perceptions of the wealthy and the poor. And he goes on to declare that the poor Muslim who's filled with faith and good character is actually superior in the eyes of Allah to countless rich men who lack those qualities.
It's such a powerful statement, because it directly confronts those societal biases that we have that so often equate wealth with virtue and poverty with inferiority. And so the hadith is flipping the script and reminding us that true worth is measured by our connection with Allah and by the quality of our deeds, not by the size of our bank accounts or our social standing.
Right, it's about looking beyond the surface to recognize the inherent dignity of every individual, regardless of their material circumstances.
And speaking of looking beyond the surface, I think this book also invites us to reflect on the sacrifices that were made by those who came before us, especially during the early days of Islam.
Hadith 455 recounts this story of Musa bin Umar, who was martyred on the day of the Battle of Uhud. And he only had very few possessions, like only a single sheet to shroud him in.
Imagine that. It's such a poignant reminder, isn't it, of the nature of this world and the true measure of success you have. A companion of the Prophet, someone who had dedicated his life to this cause, and yet in worldly terms, he died with practically nothing.
But his legacy, his impact on the course of history, is immeasurable. And it makes you realize that true wealth lies not in accumulating the possessions, but in living a life of purpose and service to Allah.
Exactly. And I think perhaps the most inspiring example of this principle is the Prophet Muhammad himself, we see in a series of hadiths from 456 all the way through 466. Just these glimpses into his very humble lifestyle, his simplicity, his detachment from worldly comforts.
It's striking, isn't it? Here's the messenger of Allah, arguably one of the most influential figures in human history, and yet his focus wasn't on accumulating wealth or surrounding himself with luxury.
Instead, his emphasis was on his mission, conveying this message of Islam and living a life that exemplified its teachings. It challenges us to reconsider our own priorities, doesn't it?
That makes me wonder. What would our lives look like if we shifted our focus from acquiring more to making a meaningful difference in the world? If our goal was to leave behind a legacy of good deeds and positive impact rather than just a pile of possessions.
That's the invitation, isn't it, to really align our hearts with the values of our faith and to strive for that lasting wealth that transcends this world. And this leads us to another important theme that emerges in this book, which is the emphasis on consistent good deeds over sporadic bursts of intense worship.
Yeah, I think this is something that really resonates with me because
Yeah.
it's easy to get caught up in the idea of grand gestures,
Right.
making big sacrifices, or performing some elaborate acts of worship. But the reality is that spiritual growth is cultivated through consistent effort, small acts of kindness and devotion that we weave into the fabric of our daily lives.
Absolutely. It's like building a strong, sturdy house.
Right.
It takes time, it takes patience, it takes consistent effort. You're laying one brick at a time, ensuring each one is properly placed and secured. And over time, through this consistent effort, a beautiful, resilient structure emerges.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's so much more relatable than thinking about, climbing this massive mountain in one go. It's like, no, it's a FIP. It's a consistent, steady climb, one step at a time.
Precisely. And AJ, this is beautifully illustrated, I think, in Hadith 467, where we see the Prophet in all of his humility, supplicating for sustenance for his family.
And it's just a powerful reminder that even the Prophet, despite his closeness to Allah, still relied on him for his daily needs. And it's pavia. It's teaching us to turn to Allah in all of our affairs, both big and small, and to really acknowledge our dependence on his provision.
And then we have a series of hadiths from 468 through 473 that really emphasize this value of consistency in good deeds, cultivating virtuous habits like regular prayer, acts of charity, kind speech, and making them an integral part of our daily lives.
Yeah, it's like that saying, don't be a Muslim only on Fridays.
All right.
Right.
Exactly.
It's about integrating these Islamic principles into every aspect of our lives.
Yeah.
And striving for excellence.
Yeah.
In everything we do, knowing that Allah sees even the smallest of our efforts.
And speaking of Allah's all-encompassing knowledge, Hadith 474 is a humbling reminder that even our best efforts are not enough to guarantee paradise. The Prophet himself acknowledges that even his own deeds will not save him without Allah's mercy.
It's a powerful message of humility, isn't it? That we should never take our salvation for granted, and that we are ultimately dependent on Allah's grace and forgiveness.
It's about recognizing that our relationship with Allah is built on both effort and surrender. We strive to do our best, but ultimately we acknowledge that our fate lies in his hands.
And this awareness of our ultimate dependence on Allah leads us to another theme that recurs throughout this book, which is the reality of death and the afterlife. And it's not presented as some distant concept, but as something that really informs our present choices and actions. So for instance, Hadith 475, the Prophet describes having this vision during prayer where both paradise and hell were displayed before him.
Wow.
Right? It's a powerful image that brings the reality of the hereafter into sharp focus and reminds us that our actions in this life have eternal consequences.
It's like a wake-up call, isn't it? To live with that awareness. That world is a temporary abode, that our true destination lies beyond it. Yeah.
And this awareness shouldn't fill us with fear or dread, but rather a sense of urgency and purpose, and motivate us to make the most of the time that we've been given, to strive to live in a way that pleases Allah.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that while this book highlights the seriousness of the hereafter, it also emphasizes the boundless mercy and compassion of Allah.
Right. And we see this very clearly in Hadith 476, where the vastness of Allah's mercy is described as offering hope to non-believers and urging believers to remain cautious.
Right.
It's a reminder that Allah's forgiveness is greater than any sin.
Yeah.
And that his door is always open to those who sincerely repent.
It's a message of hope and encouragement, isn't it? No matter how far we've strayed, no matter how many mistakes we've made, we can always turn back to Allah with a sincere heart and seek his forgiveness.
Absolutely. Well, this has been such an enriching journey through this book, Making the Heart Tender. Thank you so much for guiding us through these profound teachings.
It's been my pleasure, and I hope our listeners will take these timeless wisdom and these guidance and apply it to their lives.
Yes, I encourage all of you listening to really reflect on the messages contained within these hadiths and to consider how you can apply these lessons to your own lives. Remember that the journey to make our hearts tender is an ongoing one, and these teachings serve as a compass, guiding us towards a life of virtue, compassion, and closeness to Allah.
May Allah grant us all the strength and the guidance to purify our hearts, to live in accordance with his will, and to earn his pleasure in this life and the next.
And until next time, may peace and blessings be upon you all.